The stench of sulfur and burnt grease was the first thing that brought Raymond back to consciousness. It wasn't the clinical, sterile smell of the chemical lab in Chicago where he had spent his life testing high-polymer compounds. No, this was a heavy, suffocating heat that clung to the back of his throat like wet ash. When Raymond opened his eyes, he didn't see the shattered glass or the flashing red emergency lights of the industrial accident that had claimed his life just moments ago. Instead, he found himself staring at a ceiling made of rough-hewn black stone, damp with condensation. He tried to sit up, but a wave of dizzying heat crashed through his skull. He was lying on a thin straw mattress in the corner of a cramped, windowless wooden shack. His hands that should have been calloused and stained with industrial dye, were thin, pale, and trembling. He was 22 years old, yet this body felt fragile, lacking the solid weight of a grown man who had survived the grueling shifts of a modern chemical plant. Suddenly, a flood of foreign memories crashed into his mind, rushing through his thoughts like an icy river. The memories belonged to another Raymond. A young man, also 22, who had arrived at the Oakhaven Academy of Dark Magic with nothing but a sack of copper coins and a naive dream of becoming a revered wizard. But Oakhaven was not a place of whimsical fairy tales or romance. Built into the jagged valleys of a sunless mountain range, the academy operated on a single brutal philosophy: absolute utility. In Oakhaven, those who excelled were given status, resources, and power. Those who failed to reach the rank of mid-level apprentice within their designated trial periods were not simply sent home with a sympathetic pat on the back. They were stripped of their names and reassigned as slayer baits, human test subjects whose only purpose was to act as living vessels to contain volatile dark mana or to draw out territorial dark beasts during high-level harvesting expeditions. It was a slow, agonizing process of magical erosion. And according to the cold memories settling in Raymond's chest, his evaluation was exactly 6 weeks away. 6 weeks before the Grand Purge. Raymond gripped his temples, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The raw, unfiltered panic of a mature man realizing he was staring down a ticking clock filled his chest. In his previous life, he had managed complex chemical reactions under high pressure, knowing that a single miscalculation could blow a warehouse to pieces. He knew how to manage stress. But this was different. This wasn't a professional hazard, this was a system designed to consume him. The memories of the original Raymond showed a pathetic cycle of desperation. For 2 years, the boy had survived on the outermost fringes of the academy grounds, living in this dilapidated shack. He had been a laughingstock, an easy target. The memory of a senior apprentice named Victor flashed forward, a smug, patronizing face offering discounted magical ingredients that were actually decayed leftovers, swindling the boy out of his last valuable mana stones. The original Raymond had been too timid to fight back, too eager to please, and ultimately, his desperate attempt to brew a basic awakening serum using those corrupted herbs had ended in a quiet, lonely heart failure on this very floor. "I didn't survive a laboratory explosion just to become fodder for a dark ritual," Raymond whispered, his voice raspy but carrying the hardened resolve of a pragmatic engineer. He refused to let fear paralyze him. Fear was just a biological response to an unanalyzed problem. He forced his trembling legs to slide off the bed. Standing up, he took a look at his surroundings. The laboratory was small, messy, and disorganized. Dust danced in the faint light of an oil lamp sitting on a heavy oak workbench. Cracked glass vials, copper tubing, and iron cauldrons were scattered across the table without any logical order. To a modern chemical specialist, the setup was an absolute nightmare. There was no standardization, no precise measurement tools, no understanding of molecular weight or purity. Raymond approached the workbench, his eyes scanning the remnants of the failed experiment. He picked up a withered, dark purple stalk. According to the boy's memories, this was supposed to be moonlight grass, a stabilizing agent used to soothe the nervous system during mana cultivation. Raymond brought the leaf to his nose and took a careful sniff. A pungent, vinegar-like aroma hit his senses, followed by the faint presence of tiny, chalky white spots along the veins. His brow furrowed. His chemical training instantly flagged the anomaly. This wasn't moonlight grass. It was bone-rot flower, a highly toxic species that mimicked the appearance of the desired herb but completely destabilized any life-supporting solution. Victor hadn't just swindled the original Raymond, he had handed him a death sentence wrapped in a false smile. Raymond took a deep breath, setting the toxic herb aside. He couldn't confront Victor yet. With only 6 weeks left, his immediate priority was survival. He needed to successfully brew a stable awakening serum to jumpstart his stagnant mana circulation and form the necessary spiritual runes required to pass the Academy's test. He searched through the wooden crates beneath the table, rejecting the contaminated supplies until he found a small jar containing 3 untainted stalks of genuine moonlight grass. His hands moved with deliberate care. He cleaned the black iron mortar, removing the residue of the previous failure. He crushed the herbs into a thick, uniform paste, applying even pressure to ensure the cell walls of the plant released their active compounds. Next, he lit the small alcohol burner beneath a glass flask, melting menthol crystals until they formed a clear, viscous base. He mixed the components, his eyes tracking the color shift. It needed a catalyst. He added a precise pinch of silver powder. The solution immediately hissed, bubbling aggressively as a thick green vapor began to pour over the brim of the flask. The temperature inside the glass was rising too fast. Raymond didn't have a thermometer, but his instincts told him the reaction was entering a runaway phase. He tried to pull the flask away from the flame, but it was too late. The flask shattered, spraying a wave of dark fluid and hot steam across the wooden workbench. Raymond threw his arms up, coughing violently as the heavy smoke filled the room. He leaned against the wall, clearing his throat, his chest tight from the smoke. "Another failure," he muttered, shaking his head at the blackened mess on the table. "The thermal conductivity of this iron cauldron is completely uneven." Before he could finish his thought, a strange metallic sound echoed in his mind, like the heavy rhythmic ticking of a massive grandfather clock, followed by the deep hum of turning brass gears. There was no floating blue neon screen, no bright anime interface. Instead, a beautifully intricate, dark brass-frame display materialized within his field of vision. The edges were engraved with classical Gothic filigree, and the text appeared as if it were being stamped onto old parchment by an unseen typewriter. System log: awakening serum attempt failed. Diagnosis: incorrect thermal regulation and imperfect catalyst distribution. Error calibration activated, error data converted. Refinement effect: critical thinking and analytical accuracy increased by 200%. Raymond blinked, staring at the brass interface. A sudden, deep warmth bloomed within his chest, spreading straight up into his brain. The chaotic fog of panic and foreign memories seemed to clear instantly, replaced by a crystalline, absolute clarity. When he looked down at the shattered glass and the spilled fluid on the workbench, something incredible happened. He didn't just see a mess. His mind instantly calculated the exact angle at which the fluid had splattered, deducing the internal pressure at the moment of the burst. He could recall with absolute, perfect precision the exact microsecond the liquid had turned from blue to green, recognizing the precise thermal threshold he had crossed. The system hadn't given him an arbitrary cheat code or magical omnipotence. It had done something far more valuable for a man of science. It had transformed his failure into perfect, actionable experience. Every mistake he made was being broken down into pure data, permanently optimizing his brain's processing power and his body's muscle memory. A slow, confident smile touched Raymond's lips. The oppressive weight of the 6-week deadline didn't feel like a gallows rope anymore. It felt like a challenge. With the Gothic system recording his every step, failure was no longer his enemy. It was his greatest asset. He wiped the soot from his face, picked up a fresh cleaning rag, and began to prep the workbench for the next attempt. The journey through Oakhaven was going to be long and dangerous, but for the first time since waking up in this dark world, Raymond knew exactly how he was going to win. The morning sun barely managed to pierce the heavy gray mist hanging over the Oakhaven Academy, casting a dull, metallic light through the cracks of Raymond's wooden shack. On the table lay the remaining pouch of herbs Victor had forced upon him the previous week. Now, with his mind sharpened by the Gothic system's first calibration, Raymond didn't just see dried plants. He saw a deliberate, chemical ambush. Victor, a 25-year-old mid-level apprentice, had built his modest reputation by stepping on those below him. The original owner of this body had been a perfect target, naive, easily intimidated, and desperate for any shortcut to survive the upcoming purge. By swapping the precious moonlight grass for the toxic bone-rot flower, Victor wasn't just performing a cruel prank, he was setting a trap. Once the poison ran its course, leaving Raymond bedridden or worse, Victor could legally reclaim the room and seize the remaining 6 mana crystals Raymond had hidden beneath the floorboards. In Oakhaven, resources were scarce, and mercy was an expensive luxury. But Victor had no idea that the man sitting at the workbench was no longer a terrified teenager. Raymond looked at the toxic stalks with a calm, calculating gaze. As a modern chemical professional, he knew that every poison was merely a compound waiting to be understood. More importantly, he knew how to exploit a system that rewarded failure. Instead of throwing the toxic flowers away, Raymond decided to use them. He would intentionally push the boundaries of alchemy, using the errors to force his Gothic system to upgrade his perception. He cleaned his single intact glass beaker and set up his primitive brewing apparatus. The air inside the shack grew tense, heavy with the quiet focus of a craftsman entering his element. Raymond picked up the mortar and pestle. He placed a small portion of the bone-rot flour inside and began to grind. Scrape. 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 The rhythmic sound echoed like a steady heartbeat against the wooden walls. For his first intentional failure, Raymond deliberately increased the grinding pressure, intentionally bruising the delicate cell structures of the plant to release too much bitter sap. He mixed the paste with water and heated it over the alcohol lamp. The liquid turned a muddy, unstable brown, releasing a pungent, acidic vapor that hissed against the glass. Raymond watched it closely, keeping his breathing steady through his nose, monitoring the exact temperature where the solution began to separate. Pop! The mixture curdled into an unusable sludge. Right on cue, the heavy, mechanical ticking sounded in his mind, and the brass-engraved Gothic interface stamped its verdict into his consciousness. System log: alchemical attempt failed. Diagnosis: over-extraction of botanical impurities. Calibration activated, botanical recognition specifications upgraded by 200%. A cool, soothing sensation washed over Raymond's eyes. When he looked at the herbs again, his vision felt remarkably sharp. He could easily identify the microtextures on the leaves, tracing the subtle differences in density between the remaining genuine moonlight grass and the contaminated flowers with a single glance. But he wasn't done yet. Raymond wanted to maximize his advantages before attempting the true recipe. For the second attempt, he altered the chemical catalyst. He added an excess amount of silver powder, knowing the metallic properties would cause a violent exothermic reaction with the acidic fluid. The solution inside the beaker bubbled furiously, shifting from a bright purple to an angry boiling green. The pressure inside the sealed glass tube began to build rapidly. Raymond held the stopper down with his bare hand, feeling the intense, throbbing heat through the thick glass, measuring the exact threshold before structural failure. Just as the glass began to hairline crack, he released his grip, letting the pressure vent safely away from his face. The liquid turned completely clear like water, its active properties totally neutralized. System log: alchemical attempt failed. Diagnosis: uncontrolled thermal pressurization. Calibration activated, molecular pressure sensitivity upgraded by 200%. Now, Raymond's sense of touch was hyper-aware. The tips of his fingers could feel the microscopic vibrations of the boiling liquid, intuitively understanding the expansion and contraction of the air molecules inside the container. For the third and final intentional failure, Raymond combined the elements, pushing the simulation to the absolute edge of a magical explosion. He mixed the refined sap of both plants, creating a deeply volatile compound. The reaction was mesmerizing. Swirling vortexes of blue and red light fought for dominance inside the beaker, casting long, dancing shadows across the stone walls of the lab. The room filled with a sweet, minty aroma that signaled a critical chemical imbalance. Raymond controlled the heat source with millimeter precision, guiding the disaster right up to the point of no return before cutting the flame. The solution collapsed into a dull gray dust. System log: alchemical attempt failed. Diagnosis: total elemental asymmetry. Calibration activated, mana particle perception upgraded by 200%. With this third upgrade, Raymond's vision fundamentally transformed. When he looked at the air around him, he could see tiny drifting motes of pale light, the raw mana particles of the world, floating through the room like dust specks in a sunbeam. He could see how they reacted to heat, how they clung to certain organic materials, and how they avoided others. He had forced the system to grant him the perception of a master alchemist using nothing but his own calculated errors. Now, it was time for the true retaliation. Raymond cleared the table of all debris. He took out the remaining pure moonlight grass. This time, his movements were a flawless display of chemical mastery. His hands were perfectly steady, guided by the accumulated muscle memory of 3 successive failures. He ground the grass to the exact micrometer of thickness. He melted the base crystals at the precise thermal threshold, and he introduced the silver catalyst at the exact second the mana particles aligned. The solution didn't hiss. It didn't boil over. Instead, it let out a soft, melodious hum. The liquid smoothly transitioned into a deep, pearly blue, glowing with a gentle, serene radiance that illuminated the dark corners of the wooden shack. It was a 100% pure awakening serum, a feat that would take ordinary alchemists decades of trial and error to achieve. Raymond didn't hesitate. He raised the beaker and drank the pearly blue liquid in one smooth gulp. The effect was instantaneous and utterly profound. A wave of refreshing, cool energy surged down his throat, before exploding outward into his chest like a contained supernova. The original Raymond had possessed 3 weak, stagnant magic cores, small, fragile knots of energy that barely allowed him to light a match without exhausting himself. The pure serum attacked those cores like an industrial forge. Raymond gripped the edge of the heavy oak table, his knuckles turning white as his internal energy network was completely rewritten. He felt no agonizing pain, but rather a powerful structural restructuring. The 3 old inefficient cores were broken down, their raw energy purified and expanded. In their place, his enhanced mana perception watched as 9 magnificent, luminous rings, spiritual runes, materialized in a perfect, rotating matrix around his heart. They spun with absolute harmony, drawing in the drifting mana particles from the room like a powerful vortex. Raymond's posture straightened, a deep, resonant breath leaving his lungs as a visible ripple of wind cleared the dust from the floorboards. He opened his eyes, which now carried a faint, intelligent blue gleam. He was no longer a defenseless apprentice waiting for the executioner's axe. He had combined modern science with the logic of an ancient world to rewrite his destiny, and Victor's petty trap had provided the very ladder he used to climb. Raymond stood up, feeling the steady thrumming power of 9 spiritual runes flowing effortlessly through his veins, ready for whatever the Academy dared to throw at him next. The 9 spiritual runes rotating around Raymond's heart provided a steady, comforting warmth, but they didn't blind him to reality. Power in Oakhaven was a magnet for violence, and Victor would soon realize his poison had failed. Raymond needed a shield while he built his arsenal. Instead of seeking a soft-hearted mentor or a sympathetic elder, Raymond decided to look for someone who understood the language of survival. He needed a professional. At the edge of the Academy's lower district, where the wooden shacks gave way to the jagged stone walls of the outer valley, sat a small outpost. This was the gatehouse to the slums, guarded by Garrick, a 28-year-old former gladiator. Garrick was a man carved from granite, his broad shoulders carried the heavy scars of the arena, and his left eye was clouded over by a deep blade mark. He had been stripped of his titles and exiled to this low-level guard post after refusing to throw a match for a corrupt noble. He was cynical, fiercely independent, and completely unaligned with any of the Academy's political factions. Raymond approached the guardhouse just as the evening mist began to roll in. Garrick was sitting on a wooden crate, methodically sharpening a massive 2-handed iron broadsword. The scrape of the whetstone was loud in the quiet air. "You're far from your sandbox, apprentice," Garrick said without looking up, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble. "The wolves in this part of the woods don't care about your family's gold." "I'm not here to hide, Garrick," Raymond replied, his tone even and grounded. He stepped closer and placed a small velvet pouch on the weathered wooden table next to the guard. Inside, a single glass vial glowed with a pure, pearly blue light. Garrick stopped sharpening. His good eye focused on the vial, tracking the perfect, rhythmic swirl of the mana particles inside. As a former combatant, he knew the market value of magic. An ordinary awakening serum was rare, but a flawless, high-purity serum like this was worth a small fortune. It could heal deep tissue damage and revitalize a stagnant mana network. "Where did you steal this?" Garrick asked, his hand hovering near his sword hilt. "I didn't steal it. I made it," Raymond said, meeting the gladiator's gaze without flinching. "And I can make more. I don't want a master, and I don't want a savior. I want a partner. Victor is coming for me, and I need a deterrent while I work. In exchange for this, and a steady supply of serums to restore your old arena strength, I want a blood oath of protection for the next 4 weeks." Garrick stared at Raymond for a long, silent moment. In Oakhaven, apprentices usually begged, cried, or tried to use false status. This young man was talking like a seasoned merchant arranging a corporate merger. A blood oath was a binding magical contract. It required both parties to spill a drop of blood onto a silver parchment, sealing their agreement under the law of the Academy's Grand Registry. It was unbreakable, but it was fair. A slow, respect-filled nod escaped the veteran. "A Songfang deal," Garrick muttered, using the old mercenary slang for an honorable transaction. "You supply the fuel, I provide the wall. Let's sign." With his perimeter secured by the most dangerous man in the lower district, Raymond turned his absolute focus toward his glaring weakness. He lacked a reliable weapon. Sorting through the original owner's trunk, he found a battered parchment detailing a basic, zero-tier attack spell, Frost Pierce. In its standard form, Frost Pierce was a clumsy piece of magic. It required a 5-second verbal incantation in an ancient dialect, accompanied by a precise 4-step hand gesture to shape the mana into an icy projectile. In a real fight, a 5-second delay was an eternity. A trained combatant could close the distance and cut an apprentice's throat 3 times over before the spell could even leave their fingertips. Raymond refused to accept such an inefficient design. He was going to use his Gothic system to rebuild the spell from the ground up, forcing it into an instantaneous reflex. He walked out into a secluded clearing behind his shack, surrounded by heavy stone boulders. The air was freezing, but the sweat was already pouring down his face. Raymond raised his right hand, pointing his index finger at a large rock 10 yards away. He began the incantation. Glacis. Sphera. Vertex. On his first attempt, his pronunciation was slightly off. The mana gathered at his fingertip but dissolved into a harmless puff of cold mist. System log, fault detected in linguistic resonance. Time delay, 5.2 seconds. Calibration activated, incantation efficiency increased by 5%. Raymond didn't pause to rest. He did it again. And again. And again. Hour after hour, Raymond stood in the clearing, grinding the spell relentlessly. He wasn't just practicing, he was intentionally forcing his body and mind to make mistakes under extreme speed. He tried to cut the hand gestures in half, causing the mana to backfire and freeze his own skin. He tried to speak the incantation at triple speed, causing his vocal cords to strain and seize. By the second day, the mental exhaustion was overwhelming. Shaping raw mana required a massive amount of spiritual energy. Raymond was pushing his 9 spiritual runes to their absolute limit, spinning them so fast that his temples throbbed with a blinding white-hot agony. The sheer friction of the unrefined magic scraping through his nervous system was tearing at his throat. He stumbled forward, dropping to his knees, and coughed violently, a small splatter of dark blood hitting the white frost on the ground. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, his eyes burning with an intense, unyielding drive. Other apprentices stopped when they felt pain. They stopped when they failed, fearing they lacked the inherent talent. But Raymond knew better. Talent was just a baseline. Perfection was built on a mountain of corrected errors. Again, he hissed, his voice raw. He forced himself up and threw his hand forward. He dropped the hand gestures completely, relying purely on his willpower to shape the energy. The spell failed instantly, a sharp backlash of cold air snapping against his chest, ripping his robe. System log, critical casting error recorded. Cognitive recognition upgraded. Reflex memory integrated, casting time reduced to 1.2 seconds. He could feel it now. The system was mapping the failures directly into his neural pathways. The need for the ancient words was fading, replaced by a deep, instinctual understanding of how the mana particles preferred to move. On the 4th night of non-stop, agonizing practice, Raymond stood before the largest boulder in the clearing. His breath formed thick clouds in the midnight air. He didn't raise his arm. He didn't speak a word. He simply looked at the target. Within his mind, his 9 spiritual runes flared with a blinding blue light. The system processed the exact spatial coordinates. In a fraction of a second, just 0.3 seconds, faster than a human could blink, a sleek, razor-sharp lance of solid sapphire-colored ice materialized directly in front of his chest. It didn't need a 5-second countdown. It was an unconditional reflex. Whoosh! The ice piercer shot across the clearing with a deafening crack, leaving a trail of beautiful, glittering frost in the air. It struck the center of the massive boulder, instantly shattering the stone into a dozen fragments and coating the remains in a thick, permanent layer of blue ice. The temperature in the clearing dropped instantly, a gentle, cool breeze rustling the trees. Raymond lowered his head, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. He looked at his hands, which were steady and warm despite the freezing environment. Through sweat, determination, and a willingness to push through his own physical limits, he had turned a clumsy, low-level spell into a lethal, instantaneous weapon. He had paid for it in blood and exhaustion, but as he felt the smooth, flawless connection between his mind and his magic, Raymond knew that the foundation of his power was completely unshakable. The purge was coming, but he was no longer just a survivor, he was becoming the architect of his own victory. To truly understand the economy of Oakhaven, Raymond knew he had to leave the isolation of his shack and see the heart of its commerce. Pulling a thick, unadorned gray cloak over his shoulders and drawing the hood low to obscure his face, he set out toward Nightfall Town. The path was a treacherous half-hour trek through unpaved, muddy forest trails, lined with the makeshift hovels of low-level apprentices who lived on the edge of starvation. When he passed through the iron gates of Nightfall Town, the sheer scale of Oakhaven's systemic cruelty laid itself bare. The streets were an unpaved morass of thick mud, crowded with desperate souls. On the gutters, weakened apprentices whose mana channels had been damaged by failed experiments lay hunched over, their eyes hollow, begging passers-by for mere fragments of mana stones. In this economy, one standard mana stone was worth 100 fragments, and these forgotten students were trading their dignity for pieces no larger than grains of sand. Suddenly, the bustling crowd parted like the Red Sea, a collective hush falling over the market square. Raymond stepped back into the shadows of a merchant's stall, observing closely. A trio of senior apprentices clad in vibrant, crimson silk robes rode through the center of the thoroughfare. They were mounted upon massive, scaled dromedary beasts that moved with a heavy, thudding cadence, completely indifferent to the muddy spray painting the lower-class students who scrambled out of their way. One elder apprentice didn't even glance down as his mount nearly crushed a merchant's display. In Oakhaven, the crimson robes were combat monsters, elite assets who lived up to 150 years, fighting the academy's wars and gathering high-level resources. To them, a low-level apprentice was less than a shadow. Watching this display, Raymond looked down at his own pouch, which contained his remaining mana crystals and the allowance sent by his family. He realized with a sudden burning clarity that Victor had not just cheated him. The GA Dan on had systematically extorted him for over 2 years, inflating the prices of common ingredients by 500%. The original owner of this body had been bled dry of a small fortune that his magic-free family had sacrificed everything to provide. Keeping his head down, Raymond bypassed the predatory open-air stalls and entered an established magical pharmacy marked with a distinct green leaf logo. Inside, a polite young clerk checked his list of raw ingredients for the awakening serum. 1 full set of raw components is 80 mana fragments, the clerk said smoothly. We offer a wholesale discount for orders over 50 sets. Raymond's jaw tightened beneath his hood. Victor had charged him 15 full mana stones for a package barely worth 5. The contrast was staggering, but instead of feeding his anger, Raymond channeled it into cold focus. He purchased his raw materials using standard market rates and boarded one of the massive steel and oak public carriages heading toward the central wizard tower. It was time to officially register his breakthrough and claim what the academy owed him. The central tower was a breathtaking monolith of dark basalt that pierced through the cloud cover, an architectural marvel built on power and hierarchy. Raymond navigated the grand stone corridors, where cold pale light emanated naturally from the walls without the use of torches. He lined up quietly at the administration window, bribing a massive, intelligent raven named Lord Umair with a small mana fragment to secure a favorable interaction with the registrar, Wizard Luca. After placing his hand on a copper testing compass, the device flared with a brilliant, steady silver light, confirming the presence of his 9 perfectly structured spiritual runes. Wizard Luca, a stern man whose voice sounded like scraping glass, nodded in professional approval, logged Raymond's status as a mid-level apprentice, and handed him an inheritance crystal containing a free mid-level utility spell, the Eye of Vigilance. With his registration complete, Raymond decided to utilize his newfound access to visit the tower's expansive library. He needed to research defensive wardings and high-tier geographical maps of the surrounding mountain ranges. The library was an immense hall of soaring bookshelves, smelling deeply of old parchment, dried lavender, and ancient dust. It was completely deserted during the midday hours, offering a peaceful sanctuary. Raymond walked deep into the restricted rows, his fingers tracing the leather spines of massive volumes. He found a secluded alcove near the back wall and began to read, absorbing the unwritten laws of the continent. Then, the atmosphere shifted. Without warning, the soft, amber glow of the magical lamps lining the stone walls went completely dark. The sudden transition plunged the alcove into a heavy, thick obscurity. Raymond's modern chemical training had taught him to notice subtle atmospheric changes instantly. The ambient room temperature dropped by 10 degrees, and the air grew unusually still, carrying a faint scent of old ozone. A soft, mesmerizing whisper echoed from the shadows behind the bookshelf. It didn't sound hostile, rather it was incredibly gentle, carrying the warm, smooth resonance of an old friend offering comfort. You possess a brilliant mind, young scholar, the voice murmured, drifting through the darkness like silk. Why exhaust yourself in this cruel cycle of survival? The tower takes everything and gives nothing back. Close your eyes. Step into the shadow. I can grant you the power to crush Victor, to make Nolan Monroe kneel, to absolute mastery over the elements. All I require is a minor fragment of your spiritual foundation. As the voice continued to weave its melody, Raymond felt a strange, heavy fog rolling into his mind. His eyelids grew heavy, and a profound sense of exhaustion settled deep into his bones. The constant pressure of the 6-week deadline, the stress of his previous life's sudden end, and the grueling hours of his recent training seemed to weigh on him all at once. The voice felt like a warm blanket, inviting him to just give up the fight and accept an easy path to absolute safety. He took a slow step forward into the darkness, his hand reaching out toward the source of the whisper. An intense, bracing sensation of pure, glacial cold rushed from Raymond's 9 spiritual runes straight into his brain. The illusion shattered instantly. The warm, inviting presence evaporated, revealing the true nature of the situation. He was standing inches away from a dark, swirling mass of parasitic shadow energy that had attached itself to the damp stone wall of the forbidden section. A library phantom, a non-sentient magical anomaly left behind by a long-dead dark wizard, surviving by feeding on the emotional vulnerability of stressed apprentices. Raymond snapped his eyes open, his mind completely clear and sharp. The sheer kitsch tin of the moment caused his heart to hammer against his ribs, but his survival instincts took over completely. He didn't scream, and he didn't waste time trying to attack an intangible entity. I build my own power, Raymond said, his voice firm, echoing defiantly in the quiet alcove. I don't accept handouts from shadows. He spun on his heel and moved with calculated haste, navigating the dark rows from memory. The phantom let out a frustrated hollow hiss as it realized its psychological grip had been broken, but its range was limited to the dark alcove. Raymond burst through the heavy oak doors of the library back into the brightly lit, crowded mission plaza of the main tower, his chest heaving as he drew in clean air. He leaned against a stone pillar, a cold sweat dampening his neck. The encounter had been an absolute wake-up call. Oakhaven was a place where danger didn't always come with a roaring blade. Sometimes it came as a gentle whisper in a quiet room, waiting for a moment of weakness. But as Raymond adjusted his cloak and looked at his reflection in the polished marble floor, his resolve only deepened. His system had protected his mind, proving that his analytical clarity was an absolute shield against the irrational forces of this world. He had faced the phantom and walked out completely intact, ready to return to his lab and turn his raw materials into an empire. The narrow escape in the Central Tower's library reinforced a vital lesson in Raymond's mind. In Oakhaven, raw talent without a proper shield was nothing more than an invitation to be consumed. High-profile geniuses were wrapped in political schemes, envied by peers, and hunted by rivals. Raymond had no desire to be a tragic hero who died gloriously. He was a practical man, a chemical expert who preferred the quiet security of a well-funded laboratory. He needed a fortress, a legal shield, and a steady stream of resources that wouldn't attract the attention of predatory predators like Nolan Monroe. The answer lay in the Starleaf Syndicate, a powerful mercantile guild operating within Nightfall Town under the official protection of a high-level wizard. Raymond walked back through the bustling streets of the town, his gray cloak blending seamlessly with the crowd. He stopped before a grand, three-story building constructed from polished pine and reinforced iron. Above the doorway hung a beautifully carved wooden sign bearing a distinct green leaf logo and two elegant words, Starleaf Pharmacy. Unlike the chaotic, foul-smelling open-air stalls down the road, this place carried the soothing, crisp aroma of crushed mint, dried lavender, and premium base oils. When Raymond stepped inside, the noise of the muddy streets faded, replaced by the quiet, organized atmosphere of a modern apothecary. A few moments later, a tall woman dressed in a sharp, structured crimson dress stepped down from the grand spiral staircase. This was Steward Milena, a 26-year-old manager whose polite smile couldn't hide the sharp, assessing intelligence in her emerald eyes. She was a master of commerce, a woman who could calculate the exact profit margin of a potion with a single glance. "Welcome to Starleaf," Milena said, her voice smooth, warm, and professional. "Are you here to browse our high-grade catalysts, or do you require a specific medical consultation?" Raymond lowered his hood, offering a calm, respectful bow. "I am here regarding the notice posted on the Central Tower's mission board, Steward. I am an alchemical apprentice, and I specialize in the refinement of the Awakening Serum." Milena's eyes flickered with a sudden, keen interest. The Awakening Serum was a high-volume, high-margin product, always in high demand among the thousands of low-level apprentices fighting to survive the purge. Good alchemists were rare, and reliable ones were worth their weight in gold. "An interesting claim," Milena said, her tone remaining pleasant but cautious. "But in the syndicate, we do not trade in promises. Every potential partner must demonstrate their capabilities on the spot. If you are willing, I have a fully equipped testing laboratory ready in the back courtyard." Song Fang," Raymond replied with a confident nod. "Lead the way." The testing room was spacious, clean, and stocked with 4 identical sets of raw ingredients. Milena took a seat by the window, crossing her arms, her sharp gaze locked entirely on Raymond's hands. This was the moment where an ordinary protagonist would have shown off, brewing a flawless potion in minutes to earn praise and admiration. But Raymond was an anti-hero who prioritized long-term security over temporary vanity. If he showed a 100% success rate, the syndicate would lock him in a basement, or worse, senior alchemists would see him as an immediate threat. He needed to be valuable, but believable. He needed to position himself precisely as a promising mid-tier talent, valuable enough to protect, but ordinary enough to avoid jealousy. It was time to put on a performance. Raymond approached the workbench, his hands steady but intentionally slowing his movements to mimic a skilled but slightly nervous apprentice. He arranged the tools, lit the alcohol lamp, and began grinding the moonlight grass. For his first attempt, he deliberately allowed the pestle to slip slightly, bruising the edges of the leaves just enough to introduce minor impurities into the paste. When he mixed the silver powder catalyst, he waited 2 seconds too long, letting the temperature rise slightly above the optimal threshold. Puff! A small, harmless cloud of gray smoke erupted from the beaker, and the liquid curled into an unusable milky film. Raymond let out a soft, realistic sigh of frustration, running a hand through his hair. Milena watched silently, her expression neutral, though she noted his proper posture and correct handling of the glassware. For his second attempt, Raymond adjusted his form, looking more determined. He processed the herbs flawlessly, but during the final stabilization phase, he intentionally introduced a microscopic tremor into his hand, causing a single extra grain of catalyst powder to drop into the solution. The chemical balance tipped, and the liquid turned a dull, inert amber color. Another failure. Raymond took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment to compose himself. In reality, his internal Gothic system was silently ticking, tracking the precise variables, assuring him that everything was proceeding exactly according to his design. On the third attempt, Raymond executed the process with a perfect blend of competence and realistic effort. He ground the herbs with precise pressure, regulated the heat source meticulously, and dropped the silver powder at the exact microsecond of chemical alignment. The liquid bubbled softly, letting out a clean, refreshing minty scent as it settled into a brilliant, pearly blue hue. It was a flawless, high-purity awakening serum. He carefully poured the glowing liquid into a vial and presented it to Milena. "Please appraise it, steward." Milena took the vial, swirling the pearly blue fluid against the window light. A genuine smile of approval finally broke across her sharp features. 1 success out of 3 attempts on a fresh apparatus. A solid 40% success rate for a young apprentice. That places you comfortably at the level of a talented beginner, Raymond. "Thank you, steward," Raymond said, keeping his expression modest. Milena immediately produced a formal contract parchment, her pen ready. "The terms of Starleaf are Songfang and legally binding under the High Tower's oversight. We will provide a private high-security laboratory within this compound, full lodging, and free raw materials. In exchange, you must deliver 1 finished awakening serum for every 4 sets of ingredients we provide. Any additional successful potions you brew beyond that quota are yours to keep, or you can sell them back to us for a guaranteed rate of 4 mana crystals each." Raymond reviewed the contract clause by clause, his analytical mind calculating the immense hidden value. To Milena, a 40% success rate meant Raymond would yield about 10 successful potions from 40 sets of materials, handing over 10 to the shop and keeping none for himself unless he got lucky. But Raymond's true success rate was 100%. With 40 sets of ingredients provided for free by the shop, Raymond could easily produce 40 flawless potions. He would turn in the required 10 potions to fulfill his contract obligation. He would then hand over an additional 5 or 6 potions as extra luck, earning a clean 20 to 24 mana crystals per day in pure profit. The remaining 24 potions could be secretly stored in his private quarters, providing him with a massive, unlimited supply of fuel for his own cultivation and a reserve to supply Garrick's Blood Oath contract. By playing the role of a standard talent, Raymond had unlocked an impregnable fortress. He had gained a safe haven protected by the Syndicate's high-level security guards, an endless supply of free chemical materials to experiment with, and a massive, completely hidden passive income, all while the rest of the academy believed he was just a struggling, low-profile apprentice trying to scrape by. "The terms are highly satisfactory, Steward Milena," Raymond said, dipping the quill in ink and signing his name with a firm, decisive stroke. "I look forward to a highly profitable partnership." Milena shook his hand, her emerald eyes shining with satisfaction. "Welcome to the Starleaf Syndicate, Raymond. Your private lab is ready. Let's make something beautiful." As Raymond followed her down the quiet, secure corridor toward his new workspace, he felt the steady, reassuring rotation of the 9 spiritual runes around his heart. The web was being spun, the foundation was set, and the predator had successfully hidden himself in plain sight. The signing of the Starleaf contract secured Raymond's future, but it did not erase the immediate dangers of his past. To officially move his equipment and remaining crystals into the Syndicate's secure compound, Raymond had to make one final trip back to his old wooden shack. He knew the transition period was his moment of highest vulnerability. Victor was greedy, and a cornered rat was always the most prone to snap. The afternoon sun was sinking rapidly behind the jagged peaks of the Oakhaven Mountains, casting long, bruised shadows across the narrow forest path. Raymond walked with a steady, rhythmic pace, his gray cloak wrapped tightly around him. He looked like any other struggling apprentice, but beneath his calm exterior, his mind was hyper-aware. His newly integrated eye of vigilance spell hovered invisibly 10 meters above him, feeding a real-time, bird's-eye view of the surrounding woods directly into his consciousness. As he entered a secluded, rocky clearing where the trees grew thick and suffocating, his mental radar flared. 2 figures stepped out from the dense tree-line, blocking his path. On the left stood Victor, his face twisted into a smug, triumphant sneer. On the right was a 24-year-old aristocrat named Gavin Monroe. Gavin wore a perfectly tailored burgundy robe adorned with intricate gold embroidery. His fingers were weighed down by multiple glittering witchcraft rings, and his posture carried the insufferable arrogance of the highborn. He was the younger brother of Nolan Monroe, one of the Academy's most infamous high-level combat monsters. "Did you really think you could run to Starleaf and hide your debt, little insect?" Victor barked, stepping forward with his hand raised, a dark spark of witchcraft gathering at his fingertips. You belong to us. Raymond didn't utter a single word. There was no theatrical villain dialogue, no dramatic hesitation, and no cinematic waste of breath. Raymond was a modern pragmatic man. In a laboratory leak or a lethal ambush, the only variable that mattered was reaction time. Before Victor could even finish his threat, Raymond's 9 spiritual runes erupted with blinding intensity inside his chest. The system processed the exact vector. With 0 incantation and 0 hand movement, a razor-sharp, sapphire-blue frost-pierced lance materialized instantly and fired at point-blank range. Whoosh! Crack! The speed of the projectile was absolute. The ice lance struck Victor squarely between the eyes, shattering his skull instantly and freezing the tissue before a single drop of blood could pool on the dirt. Victor collapsed backward like a felled tree, his dark spell dissolving into harmless gray smoke. He was dead before his body hit the ground. Gavin Monroe's arrogant smile vanished, his eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated terror. He had never seen a low-level apprentice cast a 0-tier spell with instantaneous speed and lethal force. Panicking, Gavin slapped a heavy silver pendant resting on his chest, pouring his mana into it. Instantly, a translucent dome-shaped oval shield of golden light erupted around Gavin, humming with the defensive power of a high-level wizard's blessing. You crazy bastard! Do you know who my brother? Raymond didn't care about his brother. He didn't let Gavin finish the sentence. He closed the distance with a burst of explosive speed, stepping right into Gavin's personal space, his face cold and expressionless. He didn't just fire one spell. Guided by his optimized cognitive reflexes, Raymond unleashed 3 frost-pierced lances in rapid, overlapping succession, deploying them like an industrial shotgun blast at point-blank range. Bang! 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 The sheer kinetic impact of the 3 consecutive lances battered the golden shield. Deep, jagged fractures spread across the barrier like breaking glass. The high-level enchantment couldn't handle the concentrated, unyielding pressure of Raymond's instant casting reflex. With a deafening sound of shattering crystal, the golden dome broke into 1,000 harmless particles of light. The final lance drove straight through Gavin's chest, ending his breath instantly and freezing his vocal cords mid-scream. Gavin staggered back, his vision going completely dark as he slumped against a mossy boulder, completely still. The clearing fell into an absolute, ringing silence. The entire engagement had taken less than 4 seconds. Raymond stood amidst the melting frost, his breathing calm and controlled. He didn't feel a surge of twisted joy, nor did he feel overwhelming regret. It was a clean, necessary calculation for survival. He stepped forward to collect his loot, his movements efficient and methodical. Using his wizard's hand utility spell, he stripped the bodies of their valuables. From Gavin's frozen fingers, he retrieved 2 high-grade witchcraft rings capable of storing extra mana, and a heavy leather pouch containing 63 pristine, unrefined mana crystals. But the true prize was a rolled piece of ancient vellum hidden within Gavin's inner robe, the Rock Bear Revelation Formula. Raymond's eyes scanned the text, his botanical and chemical recognition systems analyzing the data instantly. It was a rare, high-tier constitution formula. By refining 100 milliliters of a rock armor demon bear's blood essence with thorny vine bark, the user could permanently upgrade their physical strength and skeletal density. This was exactly what Raymond needed to solve the mana decay Dom Exeum threatening his chest. It was a massive victory, but as Raymond rolled up the vellum, a cold, dangerous realization settled into his thoughts. Gavin was dead, but Gavin was a Monroe. The silver pendant Raymond had just shattered was undoubtedly linked to Nolan Monroe's spiritual signature. The moment the shield broke, a high-level combat monster, a man who had survived dozens of brutal border wars and commanded destructive hack-em magic, knew his younger brother had been eliminated in this sector. Raymond looked up at the towering silhouette of the central wizard tower piercing the darkening sky. He had successfully cleared the immediate thorns in his path, but in doing so, he had accidentally woken a sleeping giant. The 6-week deadline for the purge was no longer his only ticking clock. He was now sharing the board with an elite predator who would search every corner of Oakhaven for vengeance. Drawing his gray hood back over his face, Raymond packed the crystals, rings and formula securely into his inner pouch. He didn't allow the shadow of Nolan Monroe to paralyze his mind. A larger threat simply required a larger reaction, a more potent serum, and a deeper layer of deception. Turning his back on the quiet clearing, Raymond stepped back onto the forest path, heading toward the bright, protective fires of the Starleaf Syndicate. The game had grown infinitely more complex, but Raymond was ready to use every single error of his enemies to build his ultimate defense. The security of the Starleaf Syndicate compound provided Raymond with a peaceful environment, but it could not stall the physiological reality of his rapid growth. A week after the forest encounter, As Raymond unbuttoned his collar in his private laboratory, he noticed a faint pattern of charcoal gray veins tracing across his sternum. It was mana decay. His 9 spiritual runes were absorbing environmental energy at a pace that his fragile 22-year-old human body could simply not support. Without upgrading his physical structure, his vessel would eventually buckle under the weight of his own magic. He needed the Rock Bear Revelation formula. However, hunting a high-level rock armor demon bear, a massive territorial creature that shattered boulders with its bare paws, was a task for a combat team, not a solo alchemist. Raymond needed trusted hands, and he had the perfect currency. He called upon Garrick, who arrived at the compound accompanied by 3 reliable, unaligned veterans: Wade, a practical tactical fighter; Robert, a steady fire elementalist; and Monica, a gentle defensive wizard. Raymond laid out the Songfang deal. He presented them with a steady advance of flawless awakening serums and a bonus of 30 pristine mana crystals each. In return, they would venture into the jagged peaks of Gale Fjord to harvest the necessary blood essence and thorny vine bark. Thrilled by a partnership that treated them with respect and provided immense material value, Garrick's team accepted the mission, promising to return within 10 days. With the team away, Raymond locked the heavy iron doors of his private laboratory. He had 10 days of absolute isolation. It was time to push his offense past the threshold of conventional magic. He was going to overclock his soul. Raymond sat cross-legged on the stone floor, entering a deep state of meditative focus. Within his mindscape, his attention locked onto the single sapphire blue rune representing his Frost Pierce spell. It was already at the absolute peak of standard mastery, but Raymond refused to stop there. He wanted to break the system's limits. For days, Raymond did not sleep. He channeled his purified mana into the ice rune, intentionally forcing it into extreme states of stress, deliberately introducing microfrictions and intentional structural imbalances. He wanted the system to log the ultimate casting error, the point where a spell fractures under its own pressure. By the 8th night, the air inside the closed laboratory grew so cold that thick, beautiful frost crawled across the brick walls, forming intricate patterns like delicate lace. Raymond's skin was pale, and sweat froze on his brow as he pushed his mental processing power to 200%. The sheer cognitive strain made his consciousness tremble, yet his eyes remained steady, guided by an engineering mindset that saw every failure as a roadmap to perfection. On the 9th dawn, the sapphire rune in his mind could no longer contain the immense, compressed energy. With a resonant crystalline sound that echoed through his soul, the main rune fractured. Click. Tick. Tock. The Gothic interface flared within his vision, the brass gears turning with a triumphant, majestic cadence. System log: 0-tier spell Frost Pierce has exceeded maximum cognitive capacity. Emergency critical calibration engaged. Limit break activated. Evolutionary transformation recorded. Twin effect unlocked. Raymond snapped his eyes open. In the physical world, a breathtaking transformation occurred. 2 massive, luminous, sapphire-colored magical arrays, the twin relics, broke away from his spiritual core and materialized in the physical room, floating serenely right behind his shoulders like a pair of majestic, icy wings. The twin effect was a masterpiece of magical engineering. Raymond no longer needed to point his finger, move his hands, or even think about a trajectory. With a single, silent thought, the twin arrays flashed. Instantly, 2 razor-sharp ice lances materialized in mid-air, guided seamlessly by his mind like precision-engineered missiles. They darted gracefully across the room, carving sharp, elegant arcs through the freezing air before stopping millimeters away from a reinforced iron target. Even better, the limit-breaking calibration had optimized the mana circulation, reducing his energy consumption by a staggering 70%. He possessed top-tier, instantaneous firepower, wrapped in perfect efficiency. On the 10th evening, a heavy knock echoed at his door. Raymond deactivated the floating arrays and opened the lock. Garrick and his teammates stepped into the room, exhausted, covered in mountain dust, but carrying expressions of profound triumph. Robert carefully placed a heavy, chilled glass container onto the workbench. Inside, a thick, vibrant fluid glowed with a deep crimson hue, the pure blood essence of the rock armor demon bear. "We brought you the fuel, Raymond," Garrick said, a rare, warm smile breaking across his weathered, scarred face. "The beast was tough, but we fought as a true team. No one was left behind." Raymond looked at the pristine container, a deep sense of gratitude warming his chest. He didn't treat them like expendable mercenaries. He immediately handed over the remaining promise potions and an additional crate of high-grade healing salves he had brewed during his breaks. "This is more than enough. You have secured my safety, and in doing so, you have secured the future of this team. From this day forward, our partnership is unshakable." Wade, Robert, and Monica clinked their flasks together, their eyes shining with genuine loyalty. In the Toncock world of Oakhaven, they had finally found a leader who valued their lives and rewarded their labor with absolute fairness. After the team left to rest, Raymond stood alone in the quiet laboratory. The oil lamp cast a warm golden glow across the workbench, illuminating the crimson blood essence and the green thorny bark. He carefully began the chemical preparation to brew the constitution potion that would permanently heal his mana decay and rebuild his physical vessel. The video closes with a cinematic, lingering shot. Raymond stands by the high-arched window of his laboratory, holding the finished, glowing crimson elixir in his hand, ready to drink. He looks out past the protective walls of the Starleaf Syndicate, his intelligent blue eyes locking onto the distant, towering silhouette of the Central Wizard Tower. Somewhere up in those dark, basalt heights, Nolan Monroe, the elite combat monster, was actively hunting the person who had eliminated his younger brother. A total, unyielding war between an established predator and a modern scientific mind was inevitable. But as Raymond raised the vial to his lips, his expression remained perfectly calm, confident, and collective. He had turned every single failure into a weapon, and he was more than ready for the challenge ahead.